Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. Continuing our conversation with my boy Mike Jasper. And Jasper, you set up the scenario of working through the mailroom. And again, I want to reiterate this to everyone who thinks that's just like urban legend. It is very real, and lots of companies still do it today. Anywhere there is demand, there is a mailroom. Whether you start as an intern, whether you start in the ticketing class, whatever it is, sports teams have it. They are sitting there trying to make sure you understand the nuance of how all these departments work, because they want the best of the best. And usually if there's as much demand it's because they are the best of the best. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. So this probably starts as more you're a coordinator, but when did it start clicking for you? When did you start seeing what the industry was like and how partnerships worked and how important relationships were? How deep were you into this where it really started? And again, I think you and I had these conversations as you were going. I kind of remember that moment where it started clicking for you. And I think it was probably right around when you started making that first six-figure check. I think it timed itself kind of perfectly. But talk about when it was that moment and what clicked for you that you're like, all right, I can get this. This is something I can do, and I can be great at this.
That's a really good question, and I'm going to choose to answer it in a pretty specific way because I understood the mechanics of the industry. That was never foreign to me once I read a very specific book, right?
I understand the mechanics of how to throw a curveball. It doesn't mean I'm going to be out there pitching in the majors. Right?
Correct. But I think your question is more of when did it all start clicking? Yeah. When did it all start becoming one comprehension of a larger ecosystem? And I would say, when I was an assistant and later in my tenure as an assistant, the picture started becoming really, really clear. Okay. And as I became a more senior assistant in the company, I was, 3 years in at this point, I recognized that this is what I wanted to do. And I ultimately felt that this was something I could become good at. I knew I still had a lot to learn. But what I had to learn was not how the industry works, but I had to learn how to become an agent.
Yeah.
And becoming an agent isn't about how well can you negotiate a deal per se. It's about understanding the industry as a whole, trends in the marketplace, the comparisons and comps that are happening around you. But I think more importantly, becoming an agent is about framing and positioning. How do you ultimately achieve a goal that you're trying to achieve through conversation, through email, through text? And how do you represent your clients in the best way possible to ultimately get to their goal?
Yeah.
Because I believe, and I've been working very hard for the last 12 years to try to erase this stigma, that when you hear the word agent, you just assume money, right? We're the 10%ers because our company is earning its money off 10% from the deal we do.
That's almost any sales role in anything.
Correct.
The thought is why does this need a sales role? And I will tell you, if you think that way, you just don't know how to deal with salespeople, because salespeople's job is to make the transaction easiser.
That's correct.
Never harder. And the 10% that a salesperson does for you will save you 30% in how easy and how much easier it is to execute things.
Save you 30% in headache.
At least every single time. But go on.
Yeah, and it's understanding the ins and outs and the nuances. So people think about, an agent is there to get the most money possible. That's not wrong in the sense that, yes, we are trying to ultimately capture the most dollars possible, but it's about the structure of the deal.
Of course.
Right? So if a particular brand, in this instance, wants an artist to perform a certain set of services, well, they may not know that the artists don't want to, not in their best interest, don't really care, or frankly, they may not have insight as to what's coming down the pipeline for the artist.
Not only that, they can't just get on the phone and call the artist.
That's correct.
The artist doesn't want to talk to them.
That's correct.
The artists don't just give 10% away because it's like fun for them to do it.
Correct.
They don't want to talk to the people. The line is drawn to one of the things that it's so similar to what I do, especially in the sports world. But I think one of the things you're really trying to say is there's a difference between price and value.
That's correct.
And you are trying to establish a value proposition for all parties, including yourself. And now that you have skin in the game, it makes it easier to understand what the other two sides want, because when they come to an agreement, you win more, which is a positive sign of when you negotiation.
The simplest way to put it is I'm a translator.
Yeah.
Right? I translate the language that the artist speaks to the language that the brand speaks and vice versa, because these brands are out to produce a product, provide a service. Yeah. Maybe they're a nonprofit or a 501c3.
They're out there to increase their bottom line. However you state what their bottom line is, that's what they're trying to do.
Correct.
They believe something is there to increase their bottom line.
And I think more importantly for this conversation, to hone in on the fact that they are brands that are not in the entertainment business. They have to make a proactive decision to engage with and work with an artist.
Sure.
Well, that industry, the artist entertainment industry, speaks its own language. So when you have a brand that manufactures a product and that's what they are experts in. And then you have an artist who's an expert in creating art. They don't talk to each other. They don't mesh.
Sure.
So they need someone to help translate. And there are so many nuances in both the brand world and in the artist world. For example, if you're a brand and you're a Fortune 500 company, you're going to have corporate policies you have to worry about.
Oh my God.
There's no corporate policy in the artist world. Are you kidding me? The artists can do what they want when they want, because they're artists. They create. They have an artistic vision, and they're looking to express.
The only counter I would put there is the bigger you get, the more you're on tour, then all of a sudden, like Live Nation's protocols come in place of what they do. There are more things that come as you get bigger, but while as its core, a person can speak on whoever the hell they want to.
That's correct.
They can do whatever the hell they want to, and they don't have to worry about the brand logos and all that stuff.
An artist is an independent entity.
And they, because of the demand on them, that gives them even more freedom and flexibility.
That's correct.
Because people, and now there are very few instances where brands become so big that they can get into that lexicon of they can do whatever they want, but usually it's the brands need access to the entertainers and not vice versa.
Right, because think about the very basic psychology of advertising. Right? The most successful form of advertising is word of mouth.
Yep.
The human-on-human relationship. I've known you for 15 years.
Yep.
If you suggest a product or service to me, I'm significantly more inclined to try that product or service than if I'm driving down the road and see a billboard or a TV commercial. So brands engage talent because of the relationship that the talent have built with their fans and followers.
Of course.
They want to take advantage of that relationship.
Now, do you agree with me, though, that that has gotten to be to the point where you can almost tell when people are faking? And you got to be really careful nowadays, because I think people have gotten much smarter and they're more educated. And I think the word influencer has destroyed all this, because you have all these buttholes, because I can't say the other word, out here that are just throwing their name out here. They're saying I have 1 million followers, but no influence is actually taking place. That you got to be careful. You can't fake it. You should not be talking about something that you don't actually believe in or use. And I think the brands have gotten smarter to that. And I think the artists have too. They say no more to a lot more stuff because they don't want to be associated with a product that is not something that they do, because I think it becomes clear and it doesn't work for anybody. You're kind of the liaison to make sure that works also.
Correct.
Right? You know this artist. Like, look, if that's a Cracker Barrel guy, you're not going to put him and going to put him to an Applebee's. Like, it just doesn't work that way. It won't fit, and it's never going to be a long-term relationship.
Yeah, consumers are not dumb, right? At the end of the day, and I think this was really exacerbated during COVID, when people were stuck at home and paying significantly more attention to the media that was being fed to them through their screens.
Yeah.
If you are a true fan of an artist, you can pick up pretty quickly when what they're saying, doing, or promoting is not authentic to them. Yeah. Now, look, there's 3 words that I absolutely hate, but they are the pillars of our industry: authentic, organic, and synergy. Because what good does it do for either the brand or the artist to try to force messaging down a consumer or a fan's throat that is inauthentic?
Yeah.
Look, if there's a certain number of zeros on a paycheck, that shouldn't have bearing on whether or not an artist decides to put messaging in front of their fans. That artist has worked hard, sometimes decades, to build those relationships, and those are incredibly valuable, but also very fragile. Yeah. And they're a house of cards. They can be destroyed in one moment.
But there's also supply and demand. They're willing to charge what they are because people are willing to pay for it. And that's another thing that people don't understand is the economies of this. Like, the fact that somebody's willing to pay for it, that's what it's worth. Someone can offer you to pay.
How you define fair market value?
$5 and a beer to do something, but that's not how the market.
Fair market value is defined by what someone is willing to pay for a good or service.
For a good or service. And when you get the artists who are in the highest demand, that's when your eyes light up too, because now you see the money on the other side, and you probably have the relationships. And now look, there's a certain amount of trust I think that both parties have to put in each other, and that's another thing for you. Mm-hmm. That's another thing for me in my relationships. When I facilitate those relationships, I have 2 sides of the. I could piss both of them off.
Oh yeah,
right. That's not the way it works. The artist can piss the brand off. The brand can piss the artist off. You're in the middle. You could piss both of them off. That is a risk on you. You're putting yourself on your line to be the liaison between these things also. That is worth a premium. I mean, that's ultimately how it works. So we've gotten completely off topic, as I usually do on the show. So let's talk about the day-to-day. Let's talk about how WME is structured. How many agents are there around what you're doing? Do you compete with each other? How are you figuring out what to go after? What do the conversations look like? How long does an average deal take to get up on the ground and running? Yeah. What's the term of it? I want to set up the kind of unsexy stuff, because I think there are plenty of people that are listening. They're like, I want to do that. Yeah. And I don't want to scare them away, but let's be realistic, because some of these things, I know your deal cycle is not, hey, let's go have a beer and we're going to sign a deal. These are incredibly complicated deals. One, the artist has to approve, and they have a set of stipulations. If you've ever seen a rider for a band to play something, you know what those stipulations are. You could have a band who's played 3 hits in their entire life. Like, I need organic granola from this farm in Oregon, and I will not play if I don't have that granola. Like, they're nuts.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, the brand's set of protocols are almost as nuts.
That's
what
correct.
You can and can't say and where you go from it. So talk a little bit about that. I will ask you the questions. You give an answer that is framed. So what is the average time to negotiate, structure, and get a deal to paper?
Well, there almost is no average because I can knock out a social media, one-off social media post in a couple of days. But a larger tour sponsorship might take me 3 months to negotiate.
3 months, and it could be with a client that you had already known for 2 years.
That's correct.
You had 2 years to it, and that client, the last thing you pitched wasn't right, so they had to wait for the right artist to come.
Right. Well, maybe this tour isn't right, or the budget didn't get approved by the CMO in time, so we have to wait for a whole another touring cycle, which is effectively a whole calendar year. So sometimes I'll miss a shot, and I have to wait another 12 months before I can take it again.
And it's one of those things where I'm sure you have gone into it, and the situation's been right, and you close a deal like that. And you're like, how the hell did that just happen?
Absolutely.
Right?
Some of the larger deals that I've done that historically would have taken me months to do can sometimes be done in just a couple of days if we set things up. Now, one, I would think exception to that is on renewals, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to copy and paste a deal for a year 2 or a year 3, oftentimes those can be lickety split, but the first iteration was a multi-month process.
Yeah, and I think COVID, another thing it changed is it sped up the process of change so much that even the artists now, I mean, you're getting these guys, they have a hit, they can go from hit to being nobodies in like 6 months.
Correct.
That wasn't the case, especially in country music. My understanding is they had a pretty good farm system of who it was going to be. They go from the little club venues, and they go to the Roxy's,
they go to theaters,
gigs, and
then they go to arenas
or the baseball
then the
stadiums,
stadiums,
and they go to the tours, and they have a pretty good, and then they have the opening acts that follow through, and they kind of farm system. That's kind of gotten thrown completely out of whack now. So it's even harder to predict the future. So, okay, so we got that the term changes, but let's say on average, let's talk about a really big deal is going to be, let's call it 3 to 9 months is your tenure of that happening. Then there's shorter deals. So talk about the smallest deal over the past 12 months. What's an example of what a small deal is? Not money, just like what does it look like?
Yeah, a small deal is just a one-off social media post, right? It's one of our artists or one of the other talent that we represent ultimately just being engaged by a brand to do one single social media post, whether that's a single frame Instagram story, a single TikTok post, and those can be from a financial perspective for low 5-figure deals, right? And
talk about that. So what determines those price sensitivities? Is it the engagement? Is it how many followers they have? Is it how big of a name they are? What are the metrics that go into you pricing it? Because one of the things I've seen when you look at when agencies evaluate these things, they have no idea what they're talking about. They make up fake numbers and just say, this is what this is worth. And it's like, wait a second, because don't you love it where you're in, the brand wants it, but then their agency comes back and say, it's not worth that much.
Yeah, there's several different ways to do it, but I would say that the most important thing to really understand for anyone is like, it's backed up by data. So we have, the beauty of social media is the data around it. So despite what anyone says, gross followers or collective followers actually are not the driving factor for most of the brand decision making and not the driving factor for how we necessarily put value against a post. It's engagement.
Sure.
Right?
And to be fair, everyone has a different set of engagement protocols.
Correct.
Right? Is engagement, you followed it through all the way to see who purchased something? Well, you better have some pretty goddamn good advanced mechanisms to track said things so you can follow it through. Or is engagement just how many people interacted it and spread that band, which caused the virality, which ultimately everybody wants?
Right. And it is extremely rare in 2024 for a brand to not ask for screenshots of a particular talent's social media analytics, right? The back end.
Sure.
Give me the last 30 days, clicks, links, impressions, shares, views, comments, because that data, oftentimes they're plugging into their own algorithm for what the brand determines as fair market value for that type of thing. And that's a huge challenge because I'll give a great example. A brand may come to me and say, we're going to offer this artist $5,000 for this social media post. And I'll tell them, well, they actually earn closer to $15,000 for that. And the brand may say, well, our algorithm tells us based on the data. And I have to stop them right there and say, well, hold on. You just asked this artist to go create content that could take them 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours.
Yeah.
They could hop on stage and make 10x on that in a 2-hour period. So why should they take your $5,000 deal when they can 10x that in the same amount of period? So then I have to stop the brand and say, listen, what you're asking them, part of that value is how much reach, how much exposure, how many clicks. But the artist can't control that. Yeah. So the artist has to hedge the bet that the content they're making is engaging enough to produce the results that the brand wants. Right. So in a way, it's almost a bet. So how do I mitigate the risk of the brand under or overpaying, where the artist still feels like what they're earning is fair market compensation.
Well, I think it's also goes back to supply and demand, right? One of the reasons that artists can charge more is because they take less of these things. And
Correct.
if an artist took a crappy $5,000 post, then no one's going to pay $15,000. So where do you draw the line of what fair market value is versus what you want to charge is? And again, the bigger the artist, because let's talk about something right now. Whether this is sports or country music, your fandom has something really big to do with this.
That's correct.
Right? Like no matter what we say, the analytics matter. But if you're talking to the CEO of a company who really likes his artist, he's going to do whatever the hell he wants to.
I can't tell you the number of times I've had a deal either fall through or succeed because a CEO or CMO's 10-year-old daughter or 14-year-old son was a fan of that artist, and their father or mother had never heard of the person before.
I will say, if you want to take one piece of advice out of this, because ironically, what Jasper and I do is so similar. I'm just in the sports world, but ultimately, you have no idea how much influence these teams. That's why people want to be a part of teams and musicians. There is so much passion and fandom around this that is part of the influence. Like there are people out in that stadium. We're in the Brave Stadium. We're in the Battery right now. We're walking past the stadium that have signs in that outfield that have no business with signs, but they're fans and they want to be in the outfield.
They want to be a part of it.
B2B, it should never be something. But you know what? That doesn't matter. Logic and reason go out the window. And you know what else? If you can find the person who really makes those decisions, you will be a good salesperson for the rest of your life. Don't listen to the agency. They change like water, man. Get them out of there. Just be polite, talk to them, but they mean nothing in this chain of events. If a person of power in the decision-making thing wants to make that decision, they're going to make it. You know what they're going to do? They're going to high-five you and tell the agency to go F off. And the best thing in the world is when you get to watch it happen, because that's how relationships also work. So if there's a piece of advice in any of this, I'm not saying if you're in the mailroom, go walk up to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and be like, hey, how you doing? I'm Mike. Like, it doesn't work that way. But when you get to a point in your career where you do have influence over those people, all the stuff that we're talking about right now don't matter. If they believe in the artist or they believe in you, and I'm sure you've had those things where someone's like, you know what, I trust you. You know how many contracts I've signed where someone just like this, they don't even look. They talk through it, they want to get their stuff out, but then they don't even look. Usually it's covered in somehow maple syrup and bourbon when we sign, or maybe blood on the contract. but I'm saying, like, that's part of tenure. That's part of doing something for 13 years. Because
in that moment in time, it's not about the words and ink on the paper. It's about the relationship you've built and the trust that person, that decision maker has gained with you. At the end of the day, when you're doing your deals, you have an objective because this is business. They have an objective because this is business. But you also have a responsibility to make sure that you're protecting their interests as well as your own interests.
Because you want it to be a long-term deal.
That's correct.
The biggest difference.
The best word in our entire industry is renewal.
The biggest thing you can understand is that if you are trying to set up yourself to succeed, new business is the lifeblood of any organization. But if you're not renewing the business, none of it matters because you're always chasing your tail. So I think this has been great. We've gotten completely off topic again. So let's circle back. Let's talk about let's talk about some of the mega deals. Like talk about the complex. We talked about Zach Bryan and Bud Light.
Yeah, correct. So, or we could talk about Luke Combs and T-Mobile. We could talk about Kane Brown and Crown Royal, right? We can talk about these huge, what we'd call 360 deals that involve touch points and their tour and with the artists themselves. And it's marketing and social media and PR and personal appearances. I mean, there's these multi-elemental 360 deals. They're becoming fewer and further between because, as you said, brands are getting smarter, but they're a blast to work on.
Yeah. And I think one of the things this has evolved so much over the past 10 years. I remember 10 years ago when I was at Live Nation, I was running sponsorship, like because they had a deal with Starwood at the time, we could only stay at Starwood hotels. Yeah. And that was part of the deal. Like, cause you don't understand, you know how much a company like Live Nation is traveling? If they're only going to Starwood hotels, think about how much bottom line that is, but Live Nation has to stay somewhere. So who cares if they're staying at Starwood? They agree to get a rate. Part of that deal is like, all right, if you get Luke Combs or if you get Zach Bryan and they're drinking Bud Light, but they're out, they caught on a bar on social media drinking Coors Light. Do you know how bad that is for the entire thing?
Yeah, that's a grenade.
That's a grenade, but people don't think that way. That's part of this deal. Like you're asking this artist who's lived their whole life probably on drug-addled rages, doing whatever they want to. Now, hey, you can't have this competitive beer. That's why it's worth the money. That's where they become. But that's not how the brands think. The brands think they just should just be that way.
Right. I would say one of my biggest pain points of my job is when a brand strokes the check and feels like they own the artist.
Yeah.
Right. I often have to remind the brands, you're working with a human being here. Like there's going to be slip ups. There's going to be, especially if that artist doesn't have a lot of experience working in the brand space, right? It's a learning curve. It's training wheels.
I think the ones that have experience in it also know when to say no a lot more.
Yes.
And like some of these guys, they see that first check, and it might not even be the money. God knows some of these guys don't need the money, but they saw that, hey, I saw this artist go, he's done this, he has all this stuff. Well, I need to do that same thing.
Correct. Right. And we can talk about non-monetary value all day because oftentimes it's not the money that's the main driver. But for the purpose of our conversation, oftentimes if an artist and their team have their wits about them, they'll look at the deal terms and say, yeah, that is a risk. We'll breach this contract and not mean to. So they'll protect themselves by not entering into it.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. Like, contracts get really tricky because when you bring lawyers in, a lawyer's job is to keep things vague, so there's more hours of.
That's correct. Makes it harder to breach the contract.
Well, but what breach is subjective? There's no objectivity in what a breach is. Like,
correct.
If you said this is XYZ and you did this post, but in the brand's head they thought it was supposed to reach this many people, but that wasn't contracted. That's not how the world works. That's not part of the actual contract, and that's what goes into a contract. What does it mean? Look, we're negotiating intellectual property. We just extended our deal with the University of Georgia. Since 10 years ago when I started to now, do you know how much harder it was to negotiate a deal with the University of Georgia? How much more complex that intellectual property goes?
I bet the contract went from 10 pages to 100 pages.
You know what the beauty of it is? It is a one piece of paper that we signed with the University of Georgia
No way.
to this day. That being said, the trust that is there is what has evolved, but what goes in now, how NIL becomes there. Then all of a sudden, we learn from the experiences. I'm thrilled that the way the contract is written is one that elicits trust between both sides, but that doesn't make us less careful. That makes us more careful because they can just say, you breached it if you want to, because the terms aren't laid out. So I just say that as you get into, again, one of the things as I went through my career, I was terrified of contracts. I didn't want to get involved in that. Now in that world, I live in that world.
Yeah.
I hate that I live in that world, but if you understand that world, you are at a serious advantage over people who don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, some of these contracts can go 20, 30, 40 pages because you have to lay out a roadmap for what happens in any given situation. And you might have a 40-page contract that lays out, 50 different situations or scenarios, and then the 51st that you didn't put in there is the one that actually happens in real life.
The next contract, an extra 12 pages.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Lawyers love subjectivity, right? Force majeure means an act of God. Well, what does that even mean? That's a biblical term. By the definition of mankind, God is fake. What do you mean it's force majeure? So we get into these things, we could talk.
We can nerd out on contracts for hours.
But again, it's such a part of all this. So we got one more minute lesson in this segment. Talk about your favorite deal you ever done, big or small. It's just the one that sticks out in your head and why it was your favorite.
I did a really wonderful deal for an artist of ours named Eric Pasley back in 2016, I believe it was. And this deal has always stuck out to me. We were approached. So Eric's a type 1 diabetic.
Okay.
We were approached by a company called Dexcom, who at the time had created something called a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. And I was able to broker a meaningful deal for Eric as an ambassador for Dexcom. I would say fundamentally changed his life because up until the moment that deal was signed and he got the product in hand, Eric was pricking his fingers to test his insulin and blood sugar. And from that moment on, even to this day, now he wears a patch. It's an app that goes onto his phone. It means his wife, when he's on the road, his tour manager, when he's on stage, can see his glucose levels. And I just think that, I'm in a business where I pair brands and artists, and a lot of times it's a temporary relationship. But this had a massive impact on his life. And I think that I feel very fortunate to be the gateway to help improve someone's life through a brand partnership.
Yeah, but at the same time, it worked for everybody involved, right?
Right.
Now all of a sudden you have an artist who used something, a function that he did that changed his life. You have a brand who probably saw a brand lift like crazy because it was actually something that was being utilized, and you that felt the reward of not only helping a person but helping a brand.
That's correct.
When everybody wins in a deal, they get renewed. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, unless what if he doesn't have diabetes? I mean, there's a million reasons why it wouldn't renew, but as long as it goes
in that
forward.
particular situation, they did, and it was a wonderful multi-year relationship. I love
Wonderful.
that.
All right, we're gonna keep this conversation going in segment 3. You've been listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. This has been an intense conversation. We've weaved in and out. It's gone fast, but I'm going to do a past and a future. Okay, we did the present. We're going to do the past and future. So, past. What advice would you give yourself besides don't take the bus from LA to Vegas to see Nick and end up playing roulette with a crown prince from Qatar or whatever weird country with somehow with vomit on your shredder from the night before we were out of town. Besides don't do that, give advice to your younger self.
I would say to my younger self, despite the stresses, the anxieties, and the worries that I was constantly carrying throughout the mailroom and as an assistant and as a young agent, it actually will be okay. It will turn out all right. It's just so hard to see even 1 foot in front of you when you feel like you're drowning and you're trying to keep your head above water.
Yeah. So I will add to that by saying any person who thinks that stress and anxiety aren't part of life is
crazy. They're out of their minds.
Stress is a body's reaction, and you are going to cortisol because your body is reacting to something. And anxiety is because we used to be wanderers that were hunters and gatherers that would be chased by animals trying to kill us. That's what anxiety is. It's telling your body that it's time to run, it's time to fight or flight. So it's how you handle that anxiety and that stress that differentiates the most success. Some people get off on it and the stress makes them want to do more. Mm-hmm. Some people just take a step back and be like, you know what? It's not as bad as I think I am. But I think advice to everybody is it's never as bad as you think it is. And if you look and have context, there's always somebody that has it way worse than you.
Yeah.
That being said, when you get to this point in your career, you could easily look back and say, I am worth this much, not because of right now, because of all the crap that I put in back then.
Yes.
And it is a really hard thing, but I could tell you this, bosses and the highest of people, they have an eye for that.
Yeah.
They want you to hold that grudge about those things back then, because that's what makes you pressing forward and keep wanting more, which is part of what you want in life.
Well, and I think related to that, and to me, this is something that I tell as many people as I can. One of the most dangerous things that I used to do was compare myself to other people.
Yeah.
I used to look at everyone else around me and think they're bigger, they're better, they're faster, they're stronger.
Yeah.
And it used to take a real toll on me. But what I didn't realize, because I didn't have the tools at the time, I have the tools now, right? In my late 30s, working with my therapist for several years, I have the tools now to realize that I was so deep in my own narrative that I just assumed others thought about me what I thought about myself.
Yeah.
And that's was
human nature. That's not you. That's everybody. You make a depiction of yourself of what you believe other people to think of you. That's
correct.
And there's a million things.
Well, I was comparing myself to everyone around me because I thought they were better than me.
You know, that's so funny. I think if I was going to say one of the superpowers I have is since the day I don't give an effing crap about what someone thinks about me. And you know me, I've lived a lot of places. I've moved a lot. I've seen a lot of things. I've failed. I've succeeded. I've kind of winged it. And a lot of it just because like I was young, I didn't feel tethered to anywhere, and seeing all those things have changed my perspective. But you know, everybody, the most wealthy, the most happy people, usually the ones that go home to the most family problems, right? The ones that are always, the ones that are showing off their $1 million cars are the ones that have the most debt.
That's right.
You only see the tip of the iceberg, which people show you. The other thing is that when my kids were born, I made a conscious effort that social media was over. And the reason is that I have no shame. If pictures came out from me back in the day, yeah, my wife might divorce me, but other than that, I'll be fine. I don't want my children to be tied to these outward facing mechanisms that they feel like they have to be those things.
Well, and social media is unfortunately everyone's Sports Center top 10. Social media is everyone's highlight reel.
And they only see the best. I saw a girl, I'm not going to say who it was. I was at a concert and I saw a girl and she was sitting there and she would literally take a picture of herself and zoom in and like correct her teeth on Instagram before she would post. In the middle of a concert, we were watching the Smashing Pumpkins. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is what you're doing in the middle of a concert? That's what your life is? And that sucks, man.
Yeah, so I feel bad for someone like that.
We've gone off topic. So let's end with this, okay? I have been in the music industry through Live Nation, the sports industry for a long time. You have been an agent. You have been involved in all of this. What does the future of these deals look like? Where do we go from here? Because I have seen brands are going to cut back.
Yep.
You're going to see brands, they're so overstretched. The Deltas of the world, the Amexes, they are stretched in so many different places.
That's right.
Where do we go? I think AR becomes a thing, augmented reality. So you have these brand experiences that really pop up. So instead of in, let's say, a baseball game, you're between innings. Now all of a sudden the outfield pops up and you have these characters coming out that are become advertisements, but it's engaging. I think that will play, technology will always play a part, but where do you see some of these partnerships going in the next couple of years?
I think both as consumers and as brands, the thing that is the most effective is to create lasting memories, right? If you're a brand and you're sampling a physical product as people walk out of a venue or a sports stadium, that product is a consumable. It will be consumed. It will be thrown in the trash. Right? Yep. But a memory will last forever. So I believe that we'll see a lot of brands start investing more in memory making, virality type moments in time. I think.
Would you agree? The problem is those are very hard to fake. And the thing is,
they're very hard to fake.
I hate the word organic just like you do, but there are moments that are organic that are memorable, and there are things that are forced. And
yeah.
If you force them, the consumer has gotten smart enough to know that that's a fake memory.
Yeah. Look, faked or not, one of my favorite marketing campaigns ever is Lyft's Undercover Driver. I just think it was so brilliant and so smart. And it's campaigns like that to me personally, as one human, but as someone who works in the industry, I believe they're really impactful. The Undercover Driver was never take Lyft. Lyft is the best. It was a content play. Yeah. It was a brand who wanted to have a little bit of fun. Do you know who's doing it the best in the world right now? Liquid Death. There is nobody better, in my opinion, that's marketing better than Liquid Death.
You want to make a bet?
Sure.
Okay. That company will either be sold off in the next 6 months, or because that momentum that they've created, there's no way it continues. They're going to have to go mainstream. They're going to have to be standardized to get into the Krogers of the world and everything. They will either be sold off. All those people the growth will stagnate and they will become like every other brand. And here's why. When all of a sudden you realize you're going to the grocery and your groceries are now $200 instead of $100, and you realize you're paying for water in a can because of marketing, you're going to be like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. So it's not a criticism. They've done a wonderful job.
Incredible.
But I've been around a lot of CMOs and all of them say the same thing. These flash in the pan brands, but they know what they are. Okay. You can't extend that line any further.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Who do you think is the best brand marketing, or who has the best marketing in the world, do you think?
Shoot, man. It's so hard to say. I think that Google makes some of the most impactful ads that resonate with what I do in my life, but they're also a monopoly, so they can have fun with whimsy with what they do, and it doesn't matter.
I'll tell you what I think. I think Red Bull's the most disruptive marketing company in the world.
Well, Red Bull was going to be a media company before they were Red Bull. Because if you ever looked, do you know how bad Monster Energy has outsold Red Bull? Do you know their stock, that Monster Energy on the S&P 500, not Netflix, not anyone, was the #1 growth stock over 20 years was Monster Energy. No one even talks about Monster. They sell so much more than Red Bull. But Red Bull created, you know what the first one to do? They were a media company. Do you want to know why Topgolf succeeded that nobody saw? Everyone's like, who's going to do that? They built themselves as a media company. So when you're at Topgolf, you're watching Topgolf's channels, which have ads on them. They created media companies out of those things. It has switched over now. They have become, it's the people who can control those marketing narratives. Google doesn't win because you're searching. Google wins because they control their own supply demand curve. When someone comes in and they start advertising, every single plumbing company that comes in just drives up the price of advertising. Guess who wins? Google. Every time. So again, ironically, we're talking in circles about the same things, but all right. So future of the industry. So we're gonna get more towards experiences.
Yeah, more towards experience.
I think we're gonna go intimate. I think that we've been festivaled out. People don't want to be in a concert with 90,000 people.
Money can't buy experiences. That's what we're seeing a lot more of, and I think we're also going to see brands continue to get smarter in non-monetary value. Here's what I mean. Let's say a brand wants an artist to be in their TV commercial, right? There will be a certain amount of cash associated with that. But where the value proposition is going to come in is the brand is going to say, we're going to use your new single as the music bed in this commercial, and we're going to do a $50 million national TV.
Dude,
right?
You're talking U2 Vertigo that was on the Apple campaign when they signed the original Apple Music deal.
That's correct.
They released that album, and Vertigo did it because it was the Apple commercial.
That's correct.
Sprung them back. They were out of the lexicon of people for the longest time.
It was permanently embedded in the software code of that phone.
And there is a way to do it. There are so many commercial. You hear a commercial with the right track, that commercial becomes popular again, and some artists you haven't heard of in 50 years somehow go to tops of that charts. Music has changed in that sense, right?
Correct.
Like Katy Perry's album dropped, nobody cared. Nobody was downloading that album, but you had old songs that just hit it. Like the one that just came out to me was the Talking Heads. This Must Be the Place was just in a commercial, spiked the next day. People wanted, because they could plug their phone and be like, what's that song? And they listen to like, oh my God, I love the Talking Heads. So that exists more and more. But again, You're taking advantage of media that person has already bought to build the exposure of a brand.
Correct.
Those are very complicated partnerships.
Extremely complicated, because in a situation like that, you have to pay the record label, you have to pay the publishers and the songwriters. There are so many layers. I mean, that's why there's entire companies that exist to simply sync music. Anyway, your question was, where do you see the future going? I think more experiential, AR. I think money can't buy experiences. The word virality, as much as I hate that as the other three, is something that's very important because it is the truth.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see ultimately brands getting smarter. And here's what I'll say. At the end of the day, I don't know where AI is going, but AI will somehow, some way, in some form, become a important part of the celebrity endorsement and commercial ecosystem.
So it already is. And the reason I say that is because Live Nation is a data company. They preemptively know the interest in the artist before they book them coming into cities, which helps them plan tours and everything. That's not someone on a spreadsheet going, man. That is AI reading data, scanning data, and making preemptive decisions. The difference is right now we've been very reactive with AI. When it starts becoming proactive, where they can book 2 years out,
we'll see a fundamental shift.
Data they have, you will see it. Now, it's not taking over the world. I use it for this show. I use so much with AI. It can't even transcribe this whole show in one sitting. Like, we're not there yet. The machines are not coming. I promise you, we're not even close to that. There are so many things. I'm like, how is this so poorly done? But we will get there. And I think that the data becomes more and more important. I hate it because when you bring data in, you're not using your instinct and the creativity. You can't force an elicit to elicit an emotional reaction with data, right? That's one of the things we've forgotten, right? You can look at it. No one ever knew that Nirvana was going to hit with Smells Like Teen Spirit, but something was different. And the emotional connection was like, oh my God. Mm-hmm. They have tried to fake music now, come up with music. They plug it into your brain. They play these songs like, you should react to this. We can't fake creativity. So I think one of the things that's going to come about, we're going to go back to garage rock bands. Mm-hmm. We're going to go back to a guy and a band who just putting out killer music and a virality growing, not because it's spreading on social media, because people start talking about, this is the guy I want to go see.
Hey, it goes back to word of mouth, what we just talked about.
And I think that's one of the things is we will almost revolt against the phones, and we will have a resurgence of like the old school part of music. Let's call it the mid 60s, early 70s. I won't talk about whether or not I want the drug revolution to come back. We'll keep that for another time. But it's going to be awesome. And we definitely already went over. Jasper, appreciate it, brother.
Thank you very much.
Marketing Madmen, Action 106.3. We'll catch you next week.